Welcome back to another edition of the Hart2Heart Podcast. And my guest today is Cosmin Dzsurdzsa. He's a True North senior editor, researcher. Welcome to the show, brother.
Thanks for having me on, Mike.
So really wanted to chat with you today about a few hot topics. There was one thing I was talking with you about before the show. I was saying that it was even, sent to me in a group text message from one of my friends. And that was about the new online bill. So the censorship bill that's come out. So it seems like what Trudeau is trying to do is make it so that if you say almost anything hateful online, that you're, could be subjected to a fee or a fine of up to like $20,000. So like, how did this law actually get passed? And how do you think this is going to affect Canadians going forward?
So it's a bill that has been introduced. It's not legislation quite yet, but with the current status of the government, the Liberals being upheld by the NDP in the House of Commons, it's likely going to get passed. I mean, we have an election coming up in 2025. That's when Trudeau has to go up to the ballot. I think they're going to get it done before then. But it's the bill you're talking about is called the Online Harms Act, otherwise known as Bill C-63. And what it essentially does, it has several moving parts. One of them, the part that they promote the most, is this part that protects children from having sexually explicit material shared online, and prevents people from sharing deep fakes and whatnot, which I think a lot of people could stand behind. But there are other concerning elements to this bill. And the most concerning is they're going to reintroduce what is called Section 13 to the Canadian Human Rights Act. And that was a section to that act that was repealed in 2014 by the former Harper government. And what it does is it essentially extends hate speech legislation to anything that's communicated over telecommunications, including the internet. So hate speech, like the domain of the internet, the digital domain, now falls under this legislation, and the government can act and actually punish you. And the way that they're going to punish you is through the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. So you said $20,000 in fines, actually. So that was what the government first reported. I was in the technical briefing when they brought this bill out, and they had a little slideshow. That's all they provided us with. And they said it's going to be up to $20,000 in fines to the victims of these so-called online hate speech acts. But it's actually $70,000. And that's because the government the tribunal can rule that the government gets $50,000 in fines from the accused. So it's literally insane. And the process of it is that anybody can bring a complaint as long as they think you've discriminated or said something that vilifies a protected group in Canada. And Canadian human rights law has several classes of protected groups.
And just coming back to that figure, so the $70,000, you're saying that if they are found guilty and they do have to pay back the $70,000, only $20,000 goes to the victim and then $50,000 goes back to the government. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. So the tribunal can rule. Yeah. So the tribunal can rule that the victim can get up to $20,000 in compensation. But if they decide to do so based on certain criteria, and the criteria are vague, just like the rest of this bill, they can force you to pay the government $50,000 for, I guess, I don't know what, for the inconvenience of dragging you before this. It makes no sense that the government would get more than this alleged victim of these acts.
And I guess the big question now is like, how are they going to define hate speech?
Right. So they've included a definition. And one of the interesting things the government officials said during this phone call with all the media, they said that it does not necessarily align with current criminal law definitions of hate speech. So it's not based on what you can actually, the current existing laws, because we have hate speech laws in Canada. You can go to jail for saying certain things that vilifying people. So they've introduced a definition based on jurisprudence from the Supreme Court of Canada, and it's essentially a definition that says that you can't vilify or detest certain protected classes. And by protected classes, I mean things like gender, race, ethnicity, religion, etc.
Okay. So, like, if someone were to give an example of something that, maybe people would think would be on the border, like, are there any examples that you could possibly give? Like, are people going to have a hard time, do you think, discerning between what is and isn't hate speech based upon this definition? Because it does seem to be, a little bit vague, and the fines that are being handed out obviously are very hefty. So, how is this fine line going to be drawn?
Absolutely. And I think that's the purpose of it. It's open to interpretation, and the other crazy thing about this is that they don't even have to name your accuser. So this tribunal, if you're brought before it, can hide the identity of the person who filed the complaint from you. And additionally, if you find out about this person, or you suspect it's a certain individual, they can put a gag order on you to not even talk about it. So it's a kangaroo court system, and they're not. I think the point of it is to make people afraid of even saying anything or debating controversial topics like gender, race, and sex. I think that's the purpose of it.
It seems like if they give sort of like a vague definition, then they can always, use that definition and swing it to however they want it to be termed. But if they give like a strict definition and then you say something that doesn't, go against that definition, it's going to be difficult for them to, put you in jail or fine you or whatever they're going to do. But if they give this vague definition, it's like they can say anything matches the definition, which, like you said, is probably what they're trying to do, which means that everyone's going to be afraid to say anything because the definition is so vague.
Yeah, it has a chilling effect. And it's just like, it's outstanding that the government would go to such lengths to punish people for what are essentially words. There's another element to this bill. They want to increase maximum sentences for certain crimes, like what they call hate propaganda crimes. And these include some severe things like advocating for the genocide of a specific group of people. Formerly, the maximum penalty, currently, I guess we can say it's 5 years, right? But they're increasing the maximum penalty to not only that, but all sorts of hate crimes to life imprisonment. So they're willing to put people in jail for life for what they're essentially saying. And what other crime in Canada do we put people in life in prison for? Like heinous murder, cold-blooded acts. But we don't even do that with pedophiles, child predators. It's absolutely crazy what they're proposing here.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's going to be like it's very, not to use this word progressive, because that kind of term has kind of gone out the window these days. But, there's been a lot of pushback in the medical community over the last 2 or 3 years. There's been a lot of distrust in the medical community. And people think that one of the ways that we can get around that or to gain public trust again is to have open online public debates and to have scientists and experts come on and have these debates. Like I noticed Jay Bhattacharya and Dr. Jordan Peterson were kind of going back a little bit about this on Twitter today. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya has been on the show before. He's an excellent epidemiologist, but, he's been called a fringe epidemiologist because of some of his views on COVID and things like that. And it seems like this bill is only going to make all those problems a lot worse because it just takes away people's freedom to be able to say what they essentially believe. And even if they have science backed in what they say, you can still get things removed online and get hated online for it and get censored. Like it's insane. I am permanently banned from LinkedIn right now. And because of something that I posted, and all I did was I literally quoted a peer-reviewed study And I cited the article. And ironically, in the caption, I borrowed this from Lane Norton. I said data greater sign equal than feelings. And obviously that upset someone's feelings. And then I got kicked off LinkedIn. So now I'm permanently banned from LinkedIn. But anyways, you're going to have a lot more scientists who, were afraid before to speak out because of COVID and repercussions. And now the Canadian, scientists in general are going to be even more afraid, I think, because of this bill. So I think it's going to, do a disservice to the public health sector as well.
Yeah, the science issue is critical as well. You mentioned Dr. Peterson. He was one of the people who spoke out early on against the introduction of, certain protections within Canadian human rights law for things like self-identification of gender. And this is a huge issue, right? Because I currently live in British Columbia. I grew up in Ontario, but in British Columbia, we've seen a father actually thrown in jail because he was in a court case involving an ex-wife and a child who was transitioning, and he refused to address that child by the pronouns the court ordered him to use. And he had to spend a not insignificant time in jail just to have the freedom to do that. So we know that the government is already putting people in jail for this. And this is just an extra step in that direction. And you have transgender activists, at least look at Alberta, right? Premier Danielle Smith revealed her policy. There's people there who are saying that this policy, any sort of attempt to protect children and just to focus on education and get all this gender ideology out of schools is genocide. This is what they're saying. So you can imagine if you're setting up a tribunal complaint system, there are all kinds of crazy woke leftist people out there who are ready and salivating at the opportunity to abuse this against who they see as opponents, who they see as people who are perpetrating a genocide in their eyes.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people on the left who just like loopholes in general. And if they can find a way to work the system or, luke the system, they find these certain ways and, they have no problems doing it. Unfortunately, it seems like there's more and more of those people in Canada that are coming out and abusing the system. And, a lot of people now are having staffing issues in Canada because of things like that. If you talk to a lot of people, like I've had a few people on the podcast, some were physicians who have, had a lot of trouble now just staffing people because of, issues that we just discussed. But one thing too that I wanted to chat with you about today was the ArriveCan app. So the ArriveCan app, now there's going to be an RCMP investigation, it looks like. So, why are they doing this RCMP investigation and what exactly are they looking for?
So with the RCMP, they've been completely politicized under the Trudeau regime right now. Unfortunately, this is the case. We saw it with SNC-Lavalin. I don't know if your audience remembers that Trudeau faced an ethics investigation for essentially interfering in a criminal case against SNC-Lavalin, which are a major engineering and construction company in Quebec. And he wanted them to get away with criminal charges, essentially, for the justice minister at the time to intervene. And there was a certain loophole, and you see the pattern here, that would let the company accept some sort of responsibility without actually having key people go to jail. And Trudeau was not questioned once by the RCMP, even though the implications of corruption in that decision are so obvious to everybody, but they didn't touch it. And we also saw it with the We Charity stuff a few years ago. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and key members of his family benefited from We Charity, which was an organization that was very close to the Trudeaus. And they got speaking engagements, they got paid, they got trips paid. And again, the RCMP was a no-show. So I suspect that this, current claim that they're investigating, looking into it, will amount to a bunch of nothing. Because I think, like many institutions in this country, including our military, our police, our medical industry, as you're well aware of, has been compromised by people who are more interested in political objectives than actually doing what they're there to do.
Than actually doing their jobs.
Exactly.
Yeah. And with regards to the ArriveCan app, in terms of the dollars that have been gone into it, invested in it, like how many actual tax-paying dollars have gone into the ArriveCan app?
Okay, so I don't have the figure off the top of my head. I wish I looked it up before you, but it's I think the bill has gone like 500 times over what it originally was supposed to be. It was supposed to be an $80,000 application, and we're talking about tens of millions of dollars right now. So it's the suspicious part is that it's a very little known company based out of Ottawa, I believe. It's called GC Strategies. That's staffed by like 2 or 3 people. That's the entirety of the company. And they were taking government funding and for this app, which was a total failure. ArriveCan, nobody used it. I never used it. I was unvaccinated and I didn't fly, but I just saw the statistics and the usage was very low. And it had all sorts of problems. It even sent people who were vaccinated into quarantine and into these, quarantine hotels. And so this company was just dishing out work to subcontractors, and they can't prove how much of that work, how much of that money funneled out was actually even towards developing the application, maintenance of the software. Nobody knows. That's the thing, and it's obviously just a pattern, as I mentioned before. This government has a pattern of being unethical. It has a pattern of not caring about where taxpayer money goes. And they just simply, when it does become a problem for them, they do everything they can to cover it up. They will prevent witnesses from testifying, and they will even destroy documents or redact those documents or say, oh, we just simply lost them.
Yeah, I mean, there was one thing today that Pierre had brought up. I think it was just today, where he said that Trudeau was kind of hiding some certain documents, and he was hiding them for years, and it was related to some of the virology with regards to the lab. Do you know? I just saw like a kind of a little bit of a clip on this. Do you know about this story?
Yes. So this is the Winnipeg lab. So there's a national microbiology lab in Canada located in Winnipeg. And a few years ago, this would have been during the pandemic, kind of during the height, there were two scientists who have a lot of links to China that were suddenly removed from the premises. And I believe RCMP officers just went in there, took them out, stripped them of their clearance. And it emerged in the media after the fact that essentially what happened was that these people were believed to have links to the People's Liberation Army of China. Some of them collaborated with like a Chinese major who actually specializes in, I guess we could call bioweapons research. And they sent samples of the Ebola virus, of highly contagious diseases, without any pre-authorization from their higher-ups to China. And there was no checking. Nobody did any due diligence to ask what these people were doing. Yet these samples suddenly went to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And I'm sure your audience is aware of what the Wuhan Institute of Virology is, given what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic and the suspicions there. And now the government it suddenly released a redacted version of these files. But in 2021, Trudeau actually took the Speaker of the House, Anthony Rota, former Speaker, who was a member of his own party, to court to prevent the release of these documents. And there's talk now that the 2021 federal election was triggered for this purpose, to prevent the public from knowing what exactly happened. And as a matter of fact, these two scientists are gone. Nobody knows whether they're in Canada or not anymore. I was
just going to ask you, like, where no one has chatted with them. We can't get a hold of them.
They're gone. Yeah, nobody has gotten a hold of them. Nobody knows where they are. I'm suspecting they probably took their Chinese passports and left the country immediately. And that raises a lot of suspicions, right? What sort of scientist, legitimate scientist, acts in that manner? And to me, that's an agent. That's somebody who was sent here for a specific purpose, and their mission is complete, and then they're gone, right?
It's very, very suspicious. I mean, if it wasn't suspicious, if we could just ask questions, they would be able to say, "Hey, here are the two scientists. Go ahead, ask them questions. We have nothing to hide." But the fact that we can't do that, kind of makes me very suspicious. So, I don't want to go down too much of a rabbit hole here, but I do want to explore. Why do you think that happened? Like, why do you think that sort of thing was like set up? Like, what are sort of like your, I guess, worst case or most likely case scenarios of why that was ongoing and why Justin Trudeau wanted to cover things up?
Yeah, I'll explain what the theory is. So China has this program, what they call the 1,000 Talents program, and they use these different international programs to sort of recruit people and also get their own people hired at research facilities. Universities are a big example of this. There's a lot of concern in Canada that our major universities are collaborating on research with China. And we know China not to be a particularly good actor when it comes to stuff like that. They engage in corporate espionage. They engage in state espionage. They're willing to play dirty to gain an advantage over who they see as their enemy, which is the United States and their allies. So they've used these programs to filter people and even potentially get Western scientists and academics on their side through incentives, things like, okay, we can give you a placement, we'll give you a trip to this Chinese university, we'll give you grants, right? And so this has caused a whole huge amount of problems. And there are suspicions that these two scientists were involved in this sort of scheme by the Chinese government to attract researchers, gain knowledge of the capabilities of different countries, and also the shipment of the virus itself, to me, says that they wanted to get their hands on these specimens for some unknown reason. Now, with the links to this bioweapon stuff and the now more plausible...
Was it anything on Winnipeg, like specifically though, in that specific lab? Like, why was it coming from there? Yeah.
It's the top lab in Canada for microbiology. It's the national lab. So the security clearances that you need to get are pretty much high-level government clearance. And that's the other question. The people who gave these clearances didn't do their research, because journalists just had to do a Google search of these researchers' names and find that they collaborated with high-level Chinese officials. So who is giving these clearances to these people who's not, and they don't even bother to do a Google search on them?
Yeah, I mean, why don't we just kind of walk the steps back? So we can't, chat with the scientists. Let's chat with maybe the people who hired the scientists. Let's chat with the people who knew the scientists or who like hung out with the scientists, maybe outside of work, like find out more about them. Like, it seems like, this is a big deal. It seems like this is something that needs to be investigated, and that's something that Canadians deserve to know the truth about. It's odd that they're not. I'm really happy that we're talking about this today, because, I think most people would want to know the answers to these questions, and they would certainly want, the government to do the proper investigating.
Yeah, there's just failures at every single step of the way, right? The failure of getting those two particular individuals into the lab, the people in the lab who were their superiors, who had no suspicions, apparently, and then also the shipment of the viruses themselves, because that is in the territory of federal regulation, right? Transport Canada and the government regulates what leaves and comes into the country. And nobody had any suspicion that these biohazardous containers that were shipped to China were somehow suspicious. Like who gave the green light there? Who were the people handling these boxes or whatever they were contained in? Because like to me that it's just a consistent amount of failure where it doesn't even seem like failure anymore, right? It seems like
it's
okay,
systematic failure. Like there's so many checkpoints that could have been checked. Like how did they not see this coming? It has to be, like you said, just a whole systemic failure. Unreal that's what's going on, and I'm very curious to see what's going to happen now. I know Pierre has come out and said this. Has Trudeau said anything, any kind of rebuttal? Does he have any kind of reason as for why he was covering up these documents?
I don't think I've seen Trudeau respond to that, because I think you're talking about a press conference that happened this morning.
Yeah, this morning.
And I think the Prime Minister himself, his strategy has been recently to keep his head down as much as possible, because he's just absolutely detested. No matter where he goes in this country, there are people there waiting to protest him and shout at him and call him all sorts of names. So he's very disliked in Canada. But the thing is, the government right now is facing several fronts of attack, right? We're no longer talking about one scandal at a time every few months. We're talking about multiple scandals happening, right? The federal court has ruled that they overstepped in their use of the Emergencies Act. It was actually unconstitutional and unreasonable to do that to Canadian citizens just simply protesting for their rights. You have the ArriveCan app as well, and then also we have this Institute of Microbiology stuff. So they're under attack, and I think they know it. Something has to give in the coming few months, and we've yet to see what that will be. Perhaps Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will take the bullet and step down, but from my understanding and my interpretation of him as a character, I think he has too much ego to do that.
I think he has too much ego to do it too, but I think he absolutely should. Is there any other way that an election can be called before 2025, or does he just have the power basically to just sit and wait till then if he wants to, no matter what?
Yes. So their Hail Mary is essentially Jagmeet Singh. He is the one who holds Trudeau, I don't want to be graphic, but Trudeau's testicles in his hands, because they have essentially what's called a supply and exchange agreement in which the NDP are willing to support the Liberal government in crucial votes in the House of Commons in exchange for policy promises. And the latest one we saw them unroll was the pharmacare bill, which they're unveiling now. And they're doing that as a distraction, but it's a key promise to Jagmeet Singh that he will continue to support the Liberals until 2025, when Justin Trudeau's term is over. So I don't see the possibility of an election coming about unless there's something so drastic as, like we are about, like the RCMP mans up and says we're about to arrest some very key people, and it's very obvious to everybody that the government in power right now was involved in something that is potentially criminal.
Yeah, it seems like it's, like you said, it's obvious right now. They're not even hiding it. It's in plain sight. Just coming back to that pharmaceutical bill, I do agree with you. And I feel like my profession in general in medicine has really gone to the left. Like I think a lot of people who get in medicine are, genuinely, compassionate people. And sometimes people on the left do have those, character traits. But at the same time, too, it's just gone completely off the rails, where like in medical school now, like they're teaching, kids that like women can get pregnant, and things like that. And so, the reason why I bring this up is that I see a lot of these doctors online who are, leaning towards the left. They're leaning towards Trudeau. They're leaning towards Singh. And I feel like they don't really know what they're doing. They don't really know in some ways what they're talking about, because I guarantee you, like, they're already doing it. Like, they're all over this, pharma care bill now. And again, I have to look into the details of it a little bit more to see, maybe it is a good bill to pass. I'd have to look into all the details, but, it just seems like that's sort of the direction on Twitter now with medicine is, a lot of like left-leaning doctors. And I feel like they're going to be voting for Trudeau and promoting Singh and getting others to do so. And that's, really unfortunate.
Yeah. And with pharmacare, like we have to admit as Canadians, even if we're, right-leaning or conservative, that we live in a society that has universal health care, right? So it would make sense to extend that to pharmacare. But I think the question nobody's asking, is this the right time to burden people? Because it is a taxpayer burden in some sense. It's perhaps not a burden, but a responsibility, right? That we will all have to pay for and I think a lot of people would be willing to accept that we need to pay for the sickest of us, right? Because that could be us any day. But is this the right time when we have astronomical amounts of debt across this country? We have inflation. People are not earning enough to be able to face the prospect of buying their first home ever in their lifetime. And the interest rates are high. I don't think this is the right time. We should be discussing that. I think what they're doing is they're introducing it because they want to use it as a political incentive.
Yes, they want users to get votes.
Yeah.
Yeah. They want to bring in those left-wing doctors, and they want those doctors to tell all their patients and tweet out to people that, like, hey, the conservative government is evil. They don't care about you. If you really want a, good healthcare system in Canada, you better vote Liberal. You better vote NDP, because Trudeau and Singh, they know what to do with healthcare, and Pierre Poilievre doesn't. That's going to be the message, unfortunately, that's like, sent across. And there's got to be some more, like, I'm certainly going to take it upon myself to have, some kind of, political pushback on that, because I do see that being, a major issue. And I think that, unfortunately, it's probably already, like I said, working in some ways. There's already doctors tweeting about this.
Well, Mike, it's a credit to physicians like you because there are so very few of you, right? And I think a lot of people, I suspect, in your industry would probably agree with you, but they're afraid to speak out because of the climate that has been created in Canada by the government, by activist groups. It's just the risk is so large to even voice your concerns, and they're ramping up the heat. They're going to make the risk even more substantial. And just to go back to where this all started, right? The Online Harms Act. This is their step to ramp up the heat an extra notch. And it's just this creeping amount of taking away your rights piecemeal, one piece at a time. And they're doing it slowly, but also when they attack, it's just like right away, and the bill gets passed through, and then we're left to pick up the pieces. So what is the hope Canadians have left? That they perhaps Pierre will get elected in 2025 or whenever this election is called. He's got like so many things to undo, and
I know
it's a very difficult task for anybody to take that on. And I'm not naive. I don't want to place like hope on a single individual, but I think it's up to every single person. It's not just our political leadership's responsibility, because at the end of the day, when things go south, we'll be asking ourselves, what did we do in those critical moments? What did I do at that time, right?
Yes, I think that's a really good point, especially about, medicine and medical care. Like, if you want to decrease the cost of the healthcare system, what you want is you want a healthy population, a population of people that's actually motivated to exercise and to take care of themselves. We don't see that these days, and we don't get that messaging across. I think one of the best things to do to, get the cost of healthcare down, like I said, is to get people to take care of themselves better and to get better messaging out there. Like, we should have health ministers doing like podcasts with people like Andrew Huberman and like telling people like, hey, go outside, get your vitamin D, get a little bit of sunlight in your eye eyes in the morning, to help with depression, help with, with a myriad of different things, that can even help with you sleep better at night, right? So there's so many just easy things, just very easy messages that, could be put out by the Canadian government to really encourage people to, feel a little bit better and to get a little bit healthier. And, if we did that, then we would have, less strain and less costs on the healthcare system. If I think there's 37 or 38 million of us in Canada, whatever it is, but a lot of us are sick. If only a small part of us were sick, there'd be a lot less strain on the system. So, I really like the fact that you just kind of said that, what did we actually do as citizens to take it upon ourselves to make things better? Because like you said, I don't expect Pierre to fix everything. I mean, he's just going to have a hard time getting back to the things the way they were before. It's going to take forever for him to do that. I don't think it's going to be an easy transition, but I do think it's going to be a step in the right direction. Right now, we're going in the wrong direction. If you put Pierre in, I think at least we're going to be going in a step in the right direction. But yeah, it's going to take a long time before we get back to, a real good place.
Absolutely, Mike. And you would know better than anybody, though, that things like exercise, getting vitamin D are free, right? There's no profit to be made from those activities. And so we have to take that a little bit further and ask who is making profit. And to go back to the pharmaceutical industry, it overlaps so many of these issues, right? The pharmaceutical industry, and I'm not saying that they're behind everything. I just think it's a key component. They have lobbyists. They push the government in certain directions. The government is pulled in a multitude of directions by different lobbyists. But let's look at the gender stuff, right? The pharmaceutical industry has an interest in getting people on hormones for the rest of their lives because that's a lifelong patient. Additionally, with the safe supply and the opioid crisis, same thing. They have an interest, a profit interest in getting people on so-called safe drugs that the government administers and is completely made legal because it could make them a lot of money and a consistent amount of money from addicts, a lot of whom are going to be lifelong addicts because of these programs. It's not going to fix them. They're not going to abstain. And then the COVID pandemic, right? That's just an obvious case of that. We had the pharmaceutical industry playing a large role in people's lives. They literally, you were hearing about Pfizer, Moderna all of the time. That's free advertising. Yeah.
Yeah. Paxlovid, that drug was, talked about. I remember even seeing the, first trials on it, and I was thinking, oh, this might actually be good. And then the later trials, showed that, it's really not as efficacious as we thought it would. It's, used in very, very limited instances now, especially the fact that everyone's more or less got natural immunity. So yeah, I mean, the way that the pharmaceutical industry works, it's a detriment to people. And like you said, we should be focusing more on the things that are free. And yeah, like that bill, maybe it is a good bill and maybe, it will help some people and it will relieve a little bit of financial stress for people. But at the same time, there is a cost to it and we need to, address that cost and not just kind of put our blinders on, because the people on the left who are virtue signaling, they're just saying, let's just make everything free kind of thing. But it's hold up, there's going to be a cost to this. Let's definitely look at the cost of what is going to happen. And then coming back to trying to prevent it, if we had less people sick, if this messaging was getting out there, then we wouldn't need, all these pharmaceuticals, which obviously would, hurt the profits and the shareholders of these pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, it's a complex system. We can't unravel it. But any average person, any person out there who is watching this and is paying attention to it. And for me, I guess I have the advantage that it's my job just to ingest the news all the time and find out what's going on, watch Parliament, watch committees. But you just have a cursory look at what's going on, and it's easy to put two and two together. And they put up this facade about how, it's the compassionate thing to do, and they play on people's emotions, which I find the biggest problem with. They use manipulation tactics to hide their true intent, and of course they're not willing to admit that we've been lobbied this many times by this certain company, and this is what they're asking for, and that's why we're putting it forward. No, they hide those intents, and it leads to really troubling things, because it makes people ask, like, who is the government working for? We have this idea that we live in a liberal democracy where we have elected representatives working for their constituents, but I think most of the time it's not their constituents who they're working for. It's completely hidden interest, in a sense, that interests that they're not willing to talk about.
And it's also too, and I know this is, a problem kind of across the board and, basically every government, but we get to vote on the people or the party to make the decisions for us, but we don't actually get to vote on like the issue itself. Like, so we'll get to vote on whether, we want to vote for Justin Trudeau or Pierre Poilievre, but we won't get to vote on the carbon tax. Like, we won't get to vote on that. We won't get to vote on whether or not women should be, or men or biological men should be able to allowed to be in, women's change rooms. Like, we don't get to vote on that. And so, that's something that I've always thought was, a little bit, I guess, odd in some ways, and I don't really know if there's a way around that. You can't have a vote every day. I don't know if that would work, but it is something that I certainly think about. I don't know if you've kind of had similar thoughts before.
No, absolutely. Like the only mechanism I think that could actually be employed is have referendums. But then, like you said, we can't have votes every day, right? There's so many issues before government all of the time that people would get fatigued from participating in referendums. I actually think they tried this during the French Revolution. They tried to have this direct democracy approach, and just the originally, maybe at first it was like, people were eager to show up. But after, 100 votes, the participation dwindled. And if you're having 10% of people show up, is that really representative of the people's views? So there's a lot of problems. But what we can address is just representation in our parliament. We have, and a lot of places end up like this. A lot of countries in the world, we have a two-party system, right? And some would argue we have a one-party system, but that's a whole another question. But we need more representation. We need more voices in Parliament. And Prime Minister Justin Trudeau actually promised electoral reform. He promised to change the first past the post voting system, but he never followed through with that, because he realized, this actually benefits us as the, what a lot of people call the Liberals, the naturally governing party of Canada. They're kind of like the neutral state of Canada. The Conservatives come in once in a while to clean up the mess. But I think historically, Canada just leans more towards the Liberals. They have more dominance in all aspects. The Laurentian elite are pretty much all Liberal, and they see their interests in that party. Whereas the Conservatives represent the more, Western provinces and working class rural people. But I suspect the range of political opinions in Canada actually is way larger than just those two distinctions. I think people are very complex. And if we had a system that allowed for more voices and allowed for more time for parties that are not necessarily the orthodox two parties, then we could see something better.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially now if you compare Canada to the States. We always think, the States is a two-party system and our system is so much better, but it's like we basically have a two-party system too. There's never been a time where a Conservative or a Liberal, or as of right now, it's a Liberal NDP government, hasn't been in place, right? So you're basically either voting Conservative or Liberal, and your NDP vote now is going towards Liberal. So, we kind of more or less have the same system. And I think too, we have, this massive divide, just like the States does. Like the States is, divided between Biden and Trump, and Canada is divided a lot between, Trudeau and Pierre. And, I'm someone who wants to bring people together, but I'm also a realist. And I think that, we're unfortunately at a part of time in history where I don't think we can bring everyone together. I think we have to, put common sense out there, attract the people who are willing to, work and have some type of common sense and logical thinking. And then the people who, don't want to adapt, well, they're kind of left to, fend for themselves or, not to join this group. Like they can if they want. But, at this point, I don't see, how you can just keep stringing along people, and this all points towards like death in some way. Like you can't, like once you have like the utility of a person has to be positive overall. If the utility of a person is loss or negative or not being able to do anything or to need more than they can give, then that group of people is going to die because no one's actually providing for the group. Like you need to be able to provide and not need all the time. And I think that we're living in a society now where we've like perpetuated this theme that like it's okay to only want to need and not to actually give or produce anything in society. And it's insane because that leads ultimately to death in the long run. Like what you want is people just producing and sharing and, giving back to one another.
Yeah, you mentioned a very important thing, and the division. And the way I see it is it's like a schism. It's akin to a religious schism, what's happening right now, because the ideological left, the woke, diversity, equity, inclusion, the way they treat their ideas it's very like cultish, right? Like very much like they're part of some spirituality, some religious group. And the conflict that's happening, the iconoclasm and everything that's going on is like a sectarian conflict. It's more than just political. It's a clashing of two worldviews, of two ways to experience the world. And I would argue that the normal people, most of us, are still experiencing the world in the way that we've been experiencing it for our whole lives. But the left has engaged in this fantasy thinking. They've deluded themselves. They're almost living in a totally different universe. And that way of thinking, like you said, we can't reconcile it. We're talking about literal split in the way we experience not only the world, each other, relationships, everything. It's and this is the problem with ideology, political ideology particularly. It infects every aspect of life when it becomes extreme. They want to enforce it not only at the macro level, but at the micro level, at the level of the way you think, the way you behave, the way you form your families. And how do you address that, right? That's the big question. How do we get these people, how do we get them out of that cult-like thinking?
Yeah, and it's selfish in a way too, because when when you really think about it, these people are always sort of like thinking about themselves. It's like, this is my right. This is what I need. It's never about like, this is what I can, do for others, or this is what I can produce, or I can create this kind of like product. But it's always just about like, even to some degree, like, I think therapy for certain things is very, very good. If you have like a specific phobia and you get a really good therapist, you can, do amazing things. But also too, this new generation of people that are coming up, like they're kind of told to go to therapy, like for anything or just for like everyday occurrences. And I think that kind of thinking is really damaging because you're essentially thinking about yourself and your own problems all the time. Whereas like if you have more of a, I guess, I don't know if it's a conservative brain is the right word, but you're not going to be thinking as much, say, like about yourself, and there's more for you to produce for the world.
Yeah, and I read a very interesting kind of study that happened in World War II, and it found that like in areas where there was bombardment in the UK, because Britain was under attack by Germany, and they were facing literal bombardment by the Nazi Air Force. In the areas where they were being attacked, there were less people who suffered from mental like health issues, mental health crises, less people sent into sanitariums and things like that. Whereas in the rural areas, there was an uptick of people going into these institutions. They were struggling with their mental health. And to go back to what you're talking about, that like immediate connection with life, with real things, is what keeps us sane. Once we eliminate that, once we're not dealing with real things, we're just dealing with ideas, the abstract, it's very easy to get lost. And then what is left? It's a hole that sucks everything else up inside itself. And I think that's where the selfishness comes from, because they realize they can't fill this hole, and they're so detached from the real externalities of their lives. Perhaps it's because they're spending too much time on their phones, they're too much online, they're spending too much time with people who think like themselves. But yeah, I think you're getting at a valid point, and it's like we need to get these people back into reality. We need to, proverbially speaking, smack them across the face and just get them into something real instead of this fantasy world that they've built that is not only affecting them, because perhaps if it was just affecting them, it wouldn't be a big problem, but it's seeping out to the rest of us.
It's almost like they have this attitude that like, I can't compete, so because of that, I'm going to make everything worse for everyone else, and I'm going to make everyone follow my rules. Whereas like they should just say, okay, I can't compete. People are doing better than me. What can I do to maybe kind of catch up or do something to kind of change my environment or change my life? But we're not really getting that message through to, this younger generation that's coming out. And, the government, unfortunately, has all these policies now that are supporting, things that I certainly don't think should be supported. The big thing, obviously, I'm talking about is like gender affirming care. Like it's such a odd term, like to even say that, like your gender affirming care. What is gender affirming care actually? It's giving people puberty blockers, and it's, cutting off the genitalia of children and adolescents. That's what your gender affirming care is called. Like it sounds nice, gender affirming care. It's not nice. And I have no, issues with saying that I am completely against that. And I think that most physicians probably are against it. And unfortunately, there's people that are, out there that think, oh, like this is, a great business. There's going to be all these kids now growing up that want puberty blockers, that want surgeries. And these surgeries that they do, like, it's not like they have one gender affirming care surgery and it fixes it. Like there's always complications. They always need to do things over and over again. They need to do revisions. Things don't actually work. Like, they haven't really figured out how to give a girl a penis, one that actually works, that will like fit inside a vagina, that, that can get an erection. Like, it just seems like it's nonsense. So, that's why, even though I know, in some ways I'm, putting myself out there by, saying that, I'm against it. It's so insane that how could I not, and so, hopefully, more people will hear this message and maybe, give out the same message and stand up and say, I'm against it too. But, we'll have to wait and see.
Well, Mike, and it's a brave thing, right? Because you are one person standing against the system. And what you were just talking about, it brought to the question in my mind of like, why are these doctors supporting this so, vigorously? And I think it's because there's a whole complex, there's a whole system in place that has been taken over by people who buy into this sort of ideological message that is promoting it. They get TV spots, they get asked by the media, Hollywood is pushing it, the government is pushing it, their own colleges of physicians are pushing it. So the incentive is too large for them to resist, whether they admit it or not.
And like, that's the other thing too that bothers me. Like I was never asked about this. No one asked me my opinion. Like there should be like a vote, like for, talking about like, electoral reform. Well, I think that should be brought into, medical establishments. Like, I don't even know who made the decision in Ontario or in Canada or wherever to, initiate gender affirming care and, put all these things in place. I have no idea. No one asked me, but, I would have voted against it for sure. And I think that if they did actually ask all the doctors in Ontario and Canada, I wouldn't be surprised if it would have been a no.
Yeah, and it's just how the government operates. They can claim to consult certain people, but they consult everybody who agrees with them, and then this legislation comes out. But I think the important thing and the benefit
so I just want to interrupt there. It's like the all science agree thing. Like, yeah, well, all scientists agree if you're only asking the 6 scientists that you pay an insane amount of money to. But if you ask all the actual scientists in the world or in a certain area, if you actually have a realistic pool of people with different opinions, demographics, and that, you're going to get, a different opinion. And I think that unfortunately is, not being pushed out there now.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not, but I think the good thing about this moment in time, and what we're witnessing now is that there is a larger number of people waking up, and it's people of all walks of life, and they're starting to pay attention because they were only able to get all this stuff through in legislation and in the media because nobody was really paying attention. They didn't have the words to describe what was happening. But I think now we have the vocabulary, we know the strategies, and people are constantly digging and asking questions. And it's just up to every single person, like we were talking about before. It's not the duty of our political leaders. It's the duty of each and every citizen. Because who do we ultimately owe it to? It's to the future generations, not just for ourselves. We owe a better world than the one we grew up in. And right now, it looks like we're heading into a world that is much, much worse as every year passes.
And, what you said, too, about, citizens taking their own responsibility, like people should take pride in that. Like people should say, yeah, like I take responsibility for my health and, I take pride in that. And I'm going to teach my kids to take responsibility for their health, too. And, this is what we do in our family. We don't, complain about things and, let sickness take over us. We, work on preventative strategies. We work on preventative medicines to make sure that, that we don't get sick. And, I think that'll, would be a very good message to get out there. I know I only got you for another few minutes there, Cosmin. But I saw, something come out, I think it was today. It was insane. I can't believe it's happening in 2024. I think you had tweeted out about there was a member in parliament, of course, was a Liberal, who said that the 6 million unvaccinated people are like fringe or on the far right. So now he's associated everyone who's unvaccinated as being on the far right. Like, it kind of seems insane.
Yeah, it was a Liberal MP, Kevin Lamoureux, and he went in the House of Commons, and he didn't only say they were far right. He says he was thankful that they were marginalized. That's 6 million people. And we're not talking about just like a figure here. Everybody has somebody in their family or friend group who decided not to be vaccinated, right? My family, I was lucky. I was blessed that my family was a mix, but we were all accepting of each other. We didn't judge each other for the decisions we made. We understood that everybody faces their own unique circumstance. Some people face the threat of losing their job. They face the threat of, not being able to participate in the things they love. And so I personally decided not to get vaccinated. But I think just from a general point of view, what this individual, this elected official is saying in the House of Commons is hateful. If you were to slap on, just dub what he said, and it wasn't unvaccinated people, but it was some other group, that would be considered like hateful. It would be by their own standards. So clearly there's a double standard there. And I think it's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau who led this charge. He made it acceptable for his people to talk like this. There was an interview that came out, I think in 2021, where he said, all unvaccinated people are racist, misogynist, and they need to, can't, what did he say? He said, we can't tolerate these people anymore, right? And then what did he say about the Freedom Convoy? They're a fringe minority who are like extremist far right. He set the standard. It's his doing, and it's his responsibility that he's enabled this sort of vile behavior from his subordinates.
Well, I think that's a really good place to end it, Cosmin. And thank you so much again for coming on the show. I really do appreciate you sharing all the insights that you shared today. We covered a lot of really good topics that I think a lot of people would probably appreciate. But where can people learn more about you? What's your Twitter handle, and where are you writing these days?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. I love talking about this stuff, especially I always talk to news people all the time. So it's amazing to talk to somebody who's health oriented, mental health and all that. It's an area that I don't really get to discuss, but you can follow me on X at Cosmin Dzsurdzsa. And then you can check out all our news stories. We do investigative news, breaking news all the time at tnc.news.
Amazing. Well, brother, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really had a really great time chatting with you, Cosmin. And thank you so much, everybody, for listening. And as always, I'll be back again next week.